and welcome to the Freedom Podcast. It's me, your host, Josh, with Dave Thomas. Hello,
oi,
Dave.
Oi. Come on, mate. Great to be back.
Great to have you back. You have a good time in the UK?
Mate, it was absolutely fantastic. Not to be a Brit living overseas, but it was a little cold. But, you know, it was absolutely amazing. Got to be with Freedom Hereford for 3 weeks, which was absolutely incredible. Amazing seeing what's happening there.
Brilliant.
Heard some incredible stories of salvation, seeing some transformation, the passion in the place, Josh. Woo! It was awesome.
Oh, come on, mate. Yeah, it looks like you have caught a little bit of the sun today, looking a little pink in the face.
I'm a touch rouge, yes. So if you're listening to this on Spotify, Apple Music, get onto YouTube and you can see my best Rudolph impression.
And Dave, you've spoken about this, but you're famous for your sun protection regime.
Captain Sun
So
Cream.
what happens? What happens here?
Mate, you know what? I'm trying to get a bit more of a tan. So I took the risk and it didn't pay off. So, you know, there you go. This is why I'm Captain Sun Cream.
Oh gosh.
Yeah, shame. But no, we came back to, I think today for the Brits, 36 degrees, for the Americans, high 90s, something like that.
Crazy.
Yes, it's warm. It is warm.
It is a hot summer, and we last night here in North Carolina, I was driving back from prayer, and we had a storm roll in that was so dark you thought you were driving into the abyss. It was unbelievable, and the trees were literally like bending onto the road as you were driving.
I love it.
It was severe, and you could just see like the wind had caught the rain, and it was hitting you like waves. Like the wind was rolling through the rain and hitting the car. It was unbelievable. There's like flash flooding going on. Got back home and all the power was out. So, you know, like the candle, and can't cook dinner after fasting. So that was a bit of a drama. So I had to go and find somewhere that still had power to go and get a takeout. And then I welcomed the kids home with a candle. Thought this is, you know, a bit of excitement. I said to Rose, get the kids to bed while I get the takeout. And hoping that it would all be back on, because usually they're quite quick at turning these things around. Yeah. And I came back and it was still off, and all the kids were in bed, and we ate our food and they were all still awake up there. So I was like, right, they were all getting agitated because it was so warm, because there's no air conditioning when when the power has been cut. So everyone's cannot sleep. They can't like rest. So I said, right, everybody downstairs, we'll do a game. So we did a game by candlelight, and they were hyper. They were getting crazy. And then, right, it's we had a message through, it will be done by 10 o'clock. So 10 o'clock comes round and the power has not come back on. And so, right, everyone upstairs, and we get them all in bed, and they're, you know, and they do manage to fall asleep, even though they are sweating.
Mate.
And it doesn't, I cannot sleep. And it goes to about 2:30 at night before the electricity kicks back in. And Dave, I've never been so grateful for AC. It's air conditioning. I need it now. I can't.
Dude, you can't live without it over here, right?
Oh my gosh, no.
It's life. It's survival, mate. It is absolutely crazy. My neighbours, their air conditioning unit completely broke. And so they had none in their house, and they went out and they had to spend something like a couple of grand on these temp air conditioners just to get through these few weeks, because it's just next level, isn't it? The humidity,
it's unbearable, yeah.
The heat, yeah. It's not like just a few like hot nights. It's just everywhere. But thank the Lord for AC.
Super, yeah. Thank you, God. Dave, I just wanted to share. I had a message this morning from one of our team here in Raleigh, who just shared this testimony, and
come on, mate.
This is a bit of a shout out to our volunteers in the kids team, because there are people that are setting up kids spaces all around the world for Freedom Church. Sometimes they're welcoming just a handful of children. Sometimes they're welcoming dozens and dozens of children. Sometimes they're from families that are in our church. Sometimes they're just coming along as a part of someone who has is a family friend or a neighbor, and they're bringing them along to be in a church environment. And I just wanted to share this story, and it says about how I just want to express how thankful I am to you and the kids team. This past Sunday was actually indeed my little cousin's first time going to church, let alone kids' church. She has been talking about kids' church non-stop. I'm
Love
not sure
it.
what you did with her Sunday, but I can tell you she's truly been impacted. When she came home Sunday, she told her mum that she read the Bible and how much she wanted to go back. The
Come
last
on.
2 days, every morning, she's been asking if she's going to kids' church today, showing how much her heart is in expectation and hungry for God. This morning, on the way to her daycare, she asked again, and I tried explaining it was just on Sunday morning, and she got a bit sad because she really wanted to go back.
I love it.
Again, you guys truly impacted her in such a way. My aunt's now considering coming to church on Sunday, and this is completely huge for her to even say that because of her history with God and the church. Please be
Wow.
praying that my aunt will indeed come and experience that same thing her daughter did that so captured her heart. Thank you to you and your team. I've been praying for revival in my family, and I believe that my little cousin is going to be such a catalyst in this happening.
Mate, that's incredible.
How
Oh
awesome
my
is that?
goodness. Yeah, that is absolutely amazing. You're right. Our kids team, our kids volunteers all over the world. There's just nothing like it. The way that, people serve, give of their heart, time, even, obviously often not being in the message or in worship, to serve. Guys, we're just so grateful for you. And I think it's just so good to celebrate, because sometimes we don't get to hear those stories, but that's
Yeah.
absolutely incredible. Absolutely incredible. I love it.
So encouraging. And all those kids volunteers around the world, you cannot not underestimate the difference that you're making week in,
Oh,
week
come on.
out. The impact that you can have is just so good. So thank you
Love
for
it.
all those teams. Now, today, Dave, I wanted us to talk about what do we do with a problem? Do we
Come on.
allow God to fix the problem, or do we fix the problem? And I wanted us to specifically think about this, particularly from an economic standpoint as well.
Mm-hmm.
There'll be lots of different people, different backgrounds listening to this. Freedom Church is a church that we've got congregations, and our family and community is spread out in lots of different places in the world. Some who are going to be in places where they have more provision and more resource, and some where there's less. But I think that everyone, no matter what they're going through right now, can probably relate to at some point being a bit hard pressed with finances
Yeah.
and provision. And so the question really that I want us to think about is, what do we do in this day and age? So, for example, in the UK, that politically, one of the big things that is being talked about at the moment is the cost of living crisis.
Mm-hmm.
Over here in the States, there's been big cost of living differences with groceries increasing a lot in terms of other costs. And so I know that there are other economies that have also been impacted by this. And I think that someone actually messaged in recently about this, asking, what's the balance? What do you do? Do you go and work more to be able to create more provision so that you fill those gaps with increased costs? Or do you trust God with that? Like, what's the balance? So what are some of your thoughts on that?
Oh, mate, it's a great question, and it's a challenging one, because personally, I'm not sure there's a 2 + 2 = 4 answer to this. As in, I'm not sure that
Right.
there's something like a sentence I could say right now that would unequivocally, you could just apply to every single situation we might find ourselves in this, because I think that sometimes it's both. Sometimes it's one over the other, and I think also, like, even just the phrase of, do we just trust God with it? That's such a massive, statement of what that means.
Yeah, that's true.
And I was thinking about this, even in our own lives, we've experienced times where we have experienced the favor and the provision of God that can only be described as miraculous and unconnected to anything we've done, and there's even been times where, even recently moving to America, it was almost like God orchestrated and put us in a situation where we fundamentally couldn't be the solutions ourselves. And we have experienced, and we're so grateful to be able to testify that we've experienced miraculous wild provision. But we've also experienced times where we know we've been following God's leading, where we've been the ones to kick down the doors, and the provision has come through hard work, or it's come through taking opportunities. And so we've experienced both. And I think sometimes for us as Christians, one of the things that we almost need to be comfortable with is that sometimes living out our faith is a bit of a paradox. And it's not a contradiction. It's not that one cancels out the other. It's that actually we'll go through seasons where one is effectively, the very big focus, and then in another season we need to do the other. And so I was thinking about this and getting ready for the podcast, and I thought, do you know what? For me, where it all starts is knowing your own personal strengths and vulnerabilities when it comes to money. When it comes to provision, so coming at this conversation, we're all going to be in different current circumstances, but we're all going to come from different backgrounds as well. So, for some of us, we might have grown up in a real atmosphere and situation very legitimately of poverty, and others of us, we might have grown up in a situation of abundance. Some of those things we might have even gone through in younger life and even formative years can influence some of our defaults. And when it comes to, the thing of, do I jump in and sort it, or do I, give it over to God? I think it starts with knowing what you're vulnerable to. For me personally, just speaking from the most recent journey, as default, I'm more, my disposition's more, I'm going to do it. I'm going to get in, and I'm going to solve the problem. And that's partly kind of my personality, partly my upbringing. And there's been times where that has, in the right season, been amazing, and God's used it miraculously and supernaturally. But even when we moved here, I remember when we got our visa, and just quickly for those who don't know the story, we got our visa in 5.5 weeks, which on the one hand was miraculous. And we've been told it would take 15.5 months. But one of the first things that came to mind was I'd already had a plan of how over the next 12, 15 months, we were going to make this, and we were going to do that, and we were going to sell this, and we could move to America with this provision effectively, that we were able to do. And because we got the visa so quickly, none of that plan was possible, because we were just wasting time. And I just remember God saying right at the front end, this is going to be something you can't be the answer to. Right. And I knew that for me personally, there have been times where I have relied more on myself than God. And I've learned to sense those times when that rhythm's coming up in me. And so, I remember we had to face the decision. We've got the visa, so do we go or do we not go? And it was one of those things of, no, this is a time where we've got to commit and jump off the high board into the unknown, into the uncertain, without the guarantees, albeit that we still had, certain levels of provision. And for me, it's been such an amazing journey, because not only did God provide in the most mad ways, but actually he changed me in the process. So my first thought, without wanting to hog the air, is I think, I'm not sure there is it's always this or it's always that. But I think the conversation starts with, what's the work of God that he's doing in you in this season? Right now, maybe that bill's come in, but what's he doing in you? Is this a season where actually you can reflect, you've been lazy? Maybe actually you haven't, stewarded. Maybe you haven't done that in the past. Maybe what God is saying is, knuckle down, take that extra hour, that extra shift at work. Maybe that's the work God's doing in you. Maybe you've always been the answer. Maybe you've always done that, and it's come at the cost of, your relationship with God or your relationship with family. And he's saying, don't be the solution. So that's where I kind of, I guess, started thinking it through. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And thinking from my own personal perspective on it.
Yeah. I think that when I consider provision and I think about how God makes a way for us, one of the things I was just reminded of was manna, and about how God was saying, I'm going to feed you every day. But he said, don't bother collecting it. There's going to be fresh provision every day. And God could have put provision down that would have kept them for a week. Hey, supernatural. This bread, this supernatural bread could have lasted a month. But when they did that, when they tried to collect it and hoard what they had, it went maggoty and rotten,
Yeah.
and it was unusable. Because I think that God was trying to teach the Israelites in the desert when he was providing this miraculous food from heaven. Trust me every day.
Yeah.
Just give it over to me, but make me the provider. But we as mankind so want to be the provider,
Yeah.
because then we get the glory. And I think of this term about how I think particularly as men, we use this term, the breadwinner. I am the winner of bread. Imagine if that was your job every day, is that you just had to go and fight for bread. Actually sounds quite a fun job.
Mate, especially
But
your bread.
yeah.
Here
But
you go. Challenge to anybody in the Raleigh location. Let's have a bread fight outside of Josh's.
Let's go.
Set up a little ring. It'd be great.
There was recently an outreach they did in Rotterdam in the Netherlands for our campus there, where they did a bread throwing competition.
There you go.
So there's some diversity here in this theme. But anyway, coming back to this idea of being of having the daily bread. When Jesus taught us the Lord's Prayer, he taught us to ask not for bread for the week, not for provision for the month, but he wanted us to ask God every day for the most basic of things, bread. And if we were going to ask him for the small things, because he is the breadwinner.
Yeah.
He is the provider. We've got to know that our source is God our Father. He's the one that provides things from heaven for us. So if we go into it with that mentality, he gets the glory. But also when things are challenging, we come back to him for the daily bread.
Yeah.
We know that he's the one. Where if we've been doing it in our own strength and we've taken glory in it and we've been proud to put food on the table for our family, when things get tough, it's on your shoulders.
Yeah.
It's on you to provide. It's on you to make a breakthrough, for you to make a way. When God has been trying to teach us the whole time, it's not about you, it's about me. Look to me to be the one that is the provider. But why do you think we as men get caught up in that?
I think, there's a number of things. I think one of the big ones is control. When we're in control, we're in control, and that creates a sense of maybe security, a sense of safety, but also like it can lead to that pride and that element of like, well, I've done it and I can rely. And you talk about being the breadwinner. We talk about like phrases like a self-made man or a self-made woman. It's like no one's self-made when they're made by the Creator. We're only, the skills we use are only ever given to us through God. And so there are obviously people that have been hardworking and whatnot, but it all ultimately comes from him. So I think part of it is control, because we don't want to trust. We want to be able to trust in ourselves. Part of it is pride. We want to be able to say that we did it. And again, I think part of it is sometimes pressure. We feel like we've got to perform. We look at other people. Like, it's fascinating, isn't it? Like, I've recently been involved in some conversations with people that, maybe aren't following Jesus. And, they're almost always about what this person's earning, what that person's earning, what benefits that person got, or what benefits this person got. And there's almost like this competition. Yeah, well, I've done this, or I performed here and I did that. So I think, there's a lot of stuff there that we can be vulnerable to as men, as women. And I think, there's also that pressure, isn't it? I think one of the things sometimes is we can be vulnerable to almost like creating a lifestyle within our families that then it's like, well, if I don't keep that up, if we don't keep being able to eat at that place or buy that kind of thing or drive this kind of car, then it reflects on me and I've failed. So I think there's a lot of elements of that. And I think interestingly, even when we're talking about like the manna, going back to what I was saying about the season, the Israelites had forgotten what it was to follow God. They'd forgotten what it was. Even though they'd been in slavery, they'd been provided for, hadn't they? They'd had it every day. God was like, doing something deep in them to change their source of reliance.
That's right.
Because, you know, he not only knew they needed that in the desert, but they needed it in the promised land. You know, those moments with the manna would have been, you know, and obviously none of that generation went into the promised land, but there was something of a foundation he's laying that would have echoed into that moment at Jericho, at you know, all these places, because it's like, actually, if you're going to rely on yourself, you're going to rely on man, you're going to rely on me, and I'm going to unlock the miracles. And I think that's why God allows us to go through seasons of lack at times, is because actually he's trying to lead us into seasons of miracles, you know?
Yeah.
But we often don't see it like that because it's hard. It's hard, isn't it? Sometimes you want to be in that space all the time, but actually he's trying to lead us into something.
We've all had that, you know, they've been in that situation, I think, where you've been around someone that you try to give something to, or someone's trying to give something to them, and they just can't receive it.
Yeah.
It might be encouragement. It might be a gift. It might be like, hey, let me cover this drink for you. And it's like, they just really struggle to receive it, because there's a humility that it requires to receive sometimes. And I think, again, in some of our pride, we don't want to be the ones receiving. Hey, we're happy to be the ones helping others, but sometimes receiving. And I think that what God is trying to teach us through asking for daily bread and looking at him for, no matter what our circumstances are, you know, again, we've got such a spectrum of wealth that listen in and are a part of our church around the world. But it doesn't matter how much you have. We should be looking to God for the smallest of things. And when we trust him with the small things, we can trust him with everything.
Yeah.
But I think so many of us have this habit of saying, God, I'm only going to come to you when I need the house, the car. Then the rest of it, I've got that covered. But that's not what Jesus taught us to say. He said, I want you to just bring the small things to me. And the way that the Lord's Prayer is engineered, it's like daily bread is for every day, not just as a principle, but keep asking. Don't presume. Just come back to me and know that he is the provider. One of the things that go on, Dave.
I was going to say, somebody, I was just looking this up now because I made a note of it. I was having a conversation with a pastor friend of mine, and it was particularly at this front end of when we were moving over to America, and I was sharing with them and saying, oh, you know, we're obviously in this situation. He said something really interesting to me. He said, I'm so glad God's put you in a season of need. And I was like, oh, thanks.
I agree.
You know? Yeah. And he said, I'm so glad. And then he said this, he said, go look at Genesis 2. And I was like, what? And he said, so often we think that our seasons of lack and being in a position of needing someone else to provide for us is a result of sin. But actually, God made man needy in the garden before sin. That actually, he created mankind to still need him even before, you know, sin came into the world, because so much of our need is connected to sin. You know, we make bad choices. We spend our money on things that we shouldn't. And so often we look at lack as a result of, well, I must have got something wrong. I must have failed. I must have made a bad decision. But actually there's an element of need that was about or is connected to how God intended to relate to us as humanity, even before all of those things went wrong. And that blew my mind, because I almost had a theology that, well, when I'm great and when I'm good and when I've got rid of all my issues, well, I'm not going to be in a position of need. And that's, you know, God isn't against savings. He's not against those things. He's not against abundance. There's a balance with that stuff. But actually, God was just saying in that moment, Dave, you're always going to need me. It's part of our relationship. It's part of actually what I've designed you for. And just to testify again, my faith now, as a result of being through a season of need, is so much deeper, bigger, better than it was before. And you know, it's just amazing how God does that.
So good, mate. And I think that one of the things that comes to mind for me as well about how we need to prepare is thinking about the story of the vessels, and about how the widow that was going to have the provision of oil in the book of Kings, is that there was something about receiving that oil. It came down to her preparation to be able to receive. And so the prophet said, go and get as many containers, as many vessels as you can, and then lay them out. And then the oil kept flowing. It's this miraculous oil that was just this incredible provision that just provided for her. And as they went and got and gathered all these vessels, the oil ran out right to the last drop by the time it had finished the vessels. And one of the things that is always something in my mind is that we've got to have containers put out to receive God's blessing.
Yeah.
And I think sometimes if we have everything that's almost very controlled and very predictable about our lives, for example, if you're a fisherman, there is something about you put out your vessel, quite literally, your fishing boat, your nets every day, and it's completely open-ended how much you could receive. And it's the same if you're a farmer. Is that what is you're going to be your return on your crop? And so you can see God's blessing by the vessels that you're putting out in. I'm going to sow this crop. I'm going to put this net out, and then see what God does to fill it. But if we have a very contained provision, sometimes what we've got to think about, what vessels am I putting out in my life where maybe I could even give the opportunity for God to bless my household. But if you've got a very say, for example, just one stream of income in your life, maybe there's just something about putting out another, and that might look like starting a business or creating another way to be able to receive income into your life. I know that's something, Dave, that you've practiced and put into your life.
Yeah, we have. I mean, it was really interesting that kind of began for us in 2010, and I remember coming into the year, God speaking to Saz and I really about the talents, and him saying, "I want you to have vision to make you 5, 10," and he said, "I want you to have vision to earn in one day what you've been earning in 2." Now that wasn't working for church. We were doing another career at the time, and it was just this challenge because I was like, how on earth am I going to do that? And anyway, followed God's like leading on it, and by the end of the year, in that particular venture, we'd seen that come to pass, and it was genuinely miraculous. But here's the really cool thing, was that at the end of that year, we did our first ever offering for our first ever church plant, Freedom Cardiff. And we had an amount of money in our bank, and God told us to give that amount of money. If we hadn't put those vessels out, we'd have never had that sum of money to give. We'd have never ever had that sum of money to give, and what was really interesting is we didn't know that when we set out on that journey, but we knew that we would choose to be faithful with what He'd given us, and there was a whole other miracle that happened then the next year as we planted Freedom Cardiff, and it's just been really interesting because I think what you're talking about around the vessels. And I think one of the things that runs within our church, it's just so unique and so powerful, is this entrepreneurial dynamic that isn't just about making another buck or another pound or another shilling or whatever it is. It's about what we can then sow into, give into, provide for the next generation. And I think I've worked in the last few years with a number of people that run their own businesses. And there's one person that I worked with, and they were very successful in one season, and then they hit a very challenging season. And it not only cost them financially, but it cost them in a number of really significant areas. And I was talking it through with this person at some point, and they said, "Do you know what? All I was focused on was the money. And, all I was focused on was more in my savings, more in my spending account." Said, I lost sight that actually the money was to be sown. And now this particular person, is now living not with a financial vision to get, but a giving vision. And so he's got this anointing of business, but actually has decided the amount of money that they want to give a year. And that's what they aim to go and get. And it just a small, I mean, there's lots of layers to that story, but I think, when we think about it, there's something so empowering about putting the vessels out, but to give and to sow and to see a really kingdom impact, Dave. Because it's bigger than you. It's bigger than who we are,
It's so true. And God's economy is upside down. So you've got to work in different principles to what you think makes sense. So if, for example, if you need more, you give more. What? It's like you give it away and you'll actually receive more. No, that doesn't make sense. It doesn't. It's not logical. It's not mathematical. Yeah, it's because it's God's economy. It's upside down. It's inside out. It works different, and it requires faith from you. It requires trust. It requires generosity. It requires humility. All of these things that's so good for your character. And it might be that you're listening to this and you're going through a strain or a struggle right now, and your temptation is to draw back on your giving to church. It will not help you. You will go in a circular motion on this and be back in the same place. I can't tell you how many people I've pastored and seen this time and time again. They think, oh, God hasn't provided, so I'm going to lean in and take control, and I won't be giving, and I'm going to just have to ride this one out. And it gets them in financial trouble. We've got to continue to trust God with our tithes and offerings, and then even go the other way. Actually, when things are getting tough, actually become more generous. When you're strained, when there is pressure, bless others and see what God will do through that. Mate, I remember reading 100%. This book years ago. It was about financial principles. It wasn't a Christian book. It was called Rich Dad, Poor Dad, and he does a whole section about what his strategies for when his business was struggling. And he said, I would always, when business was tough, I would start sowing money out and giving it away, and I would see business take off again. And he gave no principle of God in there or anything like that. But I was, as a Christian, I was reading this. I was like, yeah, I can tell you why that's working for your business, because the principles of God are the same no matter what you practice or you believe. You go to church. If you practice these things, God is going to bless you. And so I thought that was fascinating, even seeing that from a non-Christian perspective in there as a principle, as a business principle. Oh, your business is struggling. This is how you deal with it. Be more generous.
Mate, I think, and it is profound, isn't it? Because coming back to what you were saying about manna, I think I often have in the past forgotten that money is one of or provision, let's say, because not always money, but provision is always been designed to flow in and flow out. And it's when we stop the flow that it goes rotten. It's when we stop the flow that it starts to mold up and things like that. And I think what you're talking about there is that guy has experienced that. Do you know what? In the season where the world would say, stop the flow, hold on. Actually, I'm going to get into this flow. And I can almost guarantee there'll be things that, as a result of I'm going to let that outflow, it creates an inflow in. And it's mind blowing. But we've experienced the same, when we've been in seasons where we've hit challenges. I guess one of the questions to ask, in the whole thing of do we trust God? Do we be the solution ourselves? Is when you hit financial or provision or economic stretches, is your first go to a getting strategy or a giving strategy?
Yeah.
And I think that if we can make our default a giving strategy, and it might not be that you've got any money, right, to give, but what about your time? What about your car? Can you go and give a lift to that person? What about you?
Yeah.
How can you get back in the flow,
I think though, Dave, as well, it's all relative. So, you think of the widow's offering, and she gives a very small amount, but it's everything that she had. And it's like, you might be struggling financially and it feels sometimes, oh, I don't have anything to give. You do have something. And I even find if we do just come to it financially, and even if you bless with that, it might be a very small amount to the eyes of everybody else, but it doesn't make it insignificant. It's not insignificant to you. It's not insignificant to God. And actually, don't write off that generosity just because you don't think it's a very generous amount or it's not compared to the next person. It doesn't matter. You sow it and see how God will use it so much more effectively.
Mate, 100%. And like you said, it's relative. And like Jesus even says, the parable of the widow, and he talks about the fact that she gave more, in her lack, she gave more because of that. It's interesting. It just come to mind that, just went back to the UK, and obviously catching up with people, and people were asking us, because Saz is obviously often keeping everybody up to date on the gram with what's happening. And we recently went to a lake house of a friend of ours, we were at a beach house of a friend of ours, we were staying at another house at the airport that we flew into. And so we said, oh, you're always staying at people's houses. And we're like, yeah, it's so amazing. It's like, just super generous. And then it's only just twigged. Every house we've ever lived in, when we've gone on holidays, we've offered it to people. We've just said, hey, you want to stay? And I'm not saying everybody should do this, but there's just something that we've always practiced, right? And it's not going to be for everybody, but it's just twigged. That's why we're in this flow. If we've lent our keys, others are going to lend their keys to us. And I haven't realized it until talking about it now. But it's just, it's just amazing. Yeah. Our life will be enriched when we're ready to let go. So share, give, bless, especially in those seasons of lack, especially in those seasons where we don't want it,
The measure you give will be the measure you receive.
Come on, mate.
And I think as we could circle back to this question of, when we've got an issue, when there's pressure, and there's lots of people right now and that are going through this pressure, maybe they're thinking about taking on more hours or having to do more to try and provide and fill those gaps in these times where interest rates are perhaps increasing, or there's different costs or bills that are going up. I think that when you say, what do I do? Do I do it? Or do I keep waiting on God? And this story comes to mind for me that I think helps illustrate this principle. And it's when Jesus is asked for the temple tax. And
this is good.
And this, so he's asked about the temple tax. And so there's a bit of back and forth with him and Peter and the collectors who are asking for it. And then in Matthew 17, verse 27, it says, but so that we may not cause offense, go to the lake and throw out your line. Take the first fish you catch, open its mouth, and you will find a 4 drachma coin. Take it and give it to them for my tax and yours. And I love this story because it's so wild. It's wild. Like, go and find the coin in the fish's belly. I mean, it sounds like a fairy tale, but this is in the Bible. This is Jesus having some fun because he's telling the fisherman, go fishing. But if Jesus can make coins appear in fish's stomachs, he could have easily put a coin in Peter's pocket. Could have said, right, you just reach in, it's like a little magic trick. Hey, but Peter, I'm just reaching behind your ear. Here's the coin. But he doesn't do that. He says, go fishing and I'll get the coin. And what I love about this principle, you do your bit, I'll do my bit.
Yeah,
because there's this co-laboring, this co-working with Christ, where it's not just, I'm just going to provide all your needs and you do what you can do. You drop the line in, I'll bring the fish to you. And I think that principle rings true today for so many of us listening to this. What are you doing to go fishing? What are you doing to put the line in? Allow God to bring the fish. He's the one that can bring the miracle coin in the belly. He's the one that can do that. But you've still got to go down. You've got to take your rod. You've got to drop the line in. You've got to wait for the catch. You do your bit, and then trust God to do his bit. And actually, it's not who fixes the problem. Is it me or is it God? It's actually, we're going to work together. Like, God is going to do his provision. So I just wanted to finish with that thought. Anything else, Dave, before we...
Mate, I think it's absolutely phenomenal. I think the only thing I'd add to kind of like what our bit can be is, we've got to go do our bit to go and get the coin out of the fish. But I also think one of the things we can do that's our bit is steward what's already been given to us. I know you and I both experienced massive breakthrough when we started a budget. And we, like, some of it is actually, maybe we do already have enough, but maybe we're not on top of our bills. Maybe we're paying too much. So, just those simple things, it's kind of almost sometimes that's the bit that we need to do ourselves, is actually just do our diligence, get tithing again, cut down on those expenditures, maybe make coffee at home rather than buying it at Starbucks every morning, some of those simple things. But that's where it's like sometimes we want the miracle of more, and actually sometimes like God will come and bring the miracle through diligence as well in those areas. So I think that's just one final thought, but mate, it's great. It's a great topic. And just to say to, our church right now, if you are wrestling, if you are struggling, we're a church community that want to support. So reach out to your leaders, reach out to your community. Want to first off start talking about prayer. We run Momentum. Josh, we got this whole thing in our church of helping people start businesses. We got, so the worst thing in these scenarios is to do it on your own. So, we'll get in the boat together and go find the fish, and want to help you. So reach out.
I love it, Dave. That's a great thought to finish on. Guys, thank you so much for listening. I hope this has been helpful and encouraging to you and spark you and inspire you to perhaps try doing a few different things. Go fishing. All right. God bless you. And we'll be back next week.